window 4 may be more workable, but still a something to consider. That's from the prophet Micah, Micah 6:4, where Micah says, "It has been told thee, O man, what is good, and what the Lord require of thee, only to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God." How would you present these principles, these values, justice, mercy, humility? How could you present them in stained glass? I said, where do you see justice? He says, don't you see the scales of justice? I said, where do you see walk with justice, mercy? He says, He says, can't you see the trail leading to it? He says, and then up to that? He says, that's. I said, where's humility? He says, that's the color blue. He says, that's. I said, I accept it. Beautiful. And I said, number 5 calls for a universalistic position. I said, that's the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah 56:7, who said, my house shall be a house of prayer for all people. How would you be able to present that sense of universalism, somehow all rooted together, people together, in stained glass? I said, but where is universalism in this picture that you're presenting here through stained glass? I said, look at this stained glass. I said, I see a beautiful rose. I see the stem. I said, the prophet said very clearly, my house is a house of prayer for all people. I said, how does that symbolize that? He says, look carefully at the rose. He says, do you see each petal? Every petal is different. He says, we labored over that, and he did. He had the stained glass people change those pieces umpteen times because they weren't right according to him. So Paul said to me, if you look carefully at those petals, each one being different, represents all of the people in our world. He said, we're all different, one from another. He says, but the stem, he says, if you follow it down, he says it's linked to one. He says, therefore we're all one. He says, therefore, what is my house? He says, my house is the world. My house represents all people. My house shall be a house of prayer for all people. That's the world, and that's humanity, all linked together, he says. And I said, that's a wonderful picture of universalism. Number 6 is drawn from the book of Job, Job chapter 40, verses 12 to 14. Job, who was unhappy with all of his suffering in life, finally confronts, says the author of the book of Job, someone we don't know, written long years before Jesus, a great piece of work, written, I would think, by a religious genius, who has God speak to Job, but how? Out of a whirlwind. The whirlwind representative of all of happenstance, all of the incongruities that humanity must face. And here in the midst of all of that, the symbol of it all, Job says, why? And God, the voice says, why not? He says, since the world is what it is, imperfect, he says, I can't give you an answer, an academic response to an academic question. The response can only be through your own experiences. You'll find an answer through the own experiences of your life. And therefore, if you want an answer, so the verse says, then your task, Job, is to tread down wickedness in its place, hide it in the dust, and then I'll reveal to thee that thine own right hand can save thee. I said, where is the whirlwind? He says, don't you see it leading up? He says, that's very clear. I said, but now I see what you're saying. Tread down wickedness in its place, hide it, then I'll reveal to thee that thine own right hand can save thee. And you can see the hand here is a dark hand, not a light hand, representing, he said, more of humanity. He says, and we should understand that. He says, but it's a right hand. He says, we must learn how to save ourselves. And he says, I understand even more. He says, what do you understand, Paul? He says, I understand your thinking. He says, somehow, window 6, which shows the need for humanity to finish the world, and that's the fulfillment of window 1, a world created in a state of beginning. He says window 2, which speaks of all good things having to do with a people. He says window 5 speaks about all things important having to do with all people. Window 3 that talks about holiness. He says holiness plays itself out how? By doing justly and loving mercy and walking humbly, so that window 3 and window 4 are related, just the way window 2 is related to 5, window 1 is fulfilled through window 6. He says, that's the way I see it all.